Hi everybody, welcome back to the Do More podcast. My next guest is the Merdeka Award winner Ian Yee, who has finally achieved recognition for his many years of work in investigative journalism. Him and his team have worked tirelessly behind the scenes, often without any appreciation, helping to uncover crimes against humanity using the media. They've written stories, him and his team, like corrupt land deals involving dirty public officials. They've written stories on fake college degrees, child predators and the like, and many of these stories have actually resulted in changes to the law, and oftentimes, in fact, helping to save many lives. Now, while parents may not see this as the first choice for their children in terms of their work, because it's oftentimes dangerous and very poorly paid, if at all. But the thing is, journalists, especially investigative journalists like Ian Yee, are critical if we are to progress as a nation. And so I'd like to tell his story and get him to talk about why he does what he does. One more thing, if I may add. I've always said that we are living through a golden age today, the age of the Asian century. And in this vein, I'd like to be able to talk to people of credibility and integrity, not just here in Malaysia, but also elsewhere in the region. Countries like Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, and so on. And the only way I can do that is to grow this channel and be able to get in touch with them, to talk to them. So please, if you can, do hit the subscribe button. Tell your friends to also do so if they do like the content on my channel. And of course, always engage with me whenever possible. Because the larger this channel is, the more able I am to expand its presence and reach. So thank you in advance. And now, without further ado, may I present the investigative journalist and Merdeka Award winner, Ian Yee. Hey, so Ian, thanks for doing this, man.
No worries.
You look like you're deep in the story, man. You've got that deep in the story face. What are you working on right now?
No, we don't really have an investigation ongoing right now. But yeah, there's always a whole bunch of other things that we have to work on in order to fund our next investigation. So yeah, that's kind of it. We're always in that mode.
So the funding process, the constant need for money to fund operations is always going on, is it?
Yeah, I think operations is not so bad, as in like what people normally think of as operations within an organization.
Mm-hmm.
For us, investigations are like a whole different ballgame, right? Like the amount of money that has to go into it, the amount of resources, time that has to be spent is quite significant. And then all the whole time you're doing it, you don't know if it's going to have any major impact. So that's always a challenge. Yeah.
So how do you choose which ones to pursue?
Yeah, I think at any given time we have probably 10, 15 leads on our table. Lots of things that we want to investigate that we kind of know have stories that have legs in a way. But at the end of the day, we have to pick and choose. So we prioritize the ones that we feel we can add value to, that we know that can have an impact. So like I said, a lot of stories you can work on them, and then for years nothing happens, right? There are a lot of dead ends. You don't get the kind of evidentiary threshold that you need to really be confident in the story, but you just kind of know something's there, right? So at the end of the day, we pick the ones that we know most likely we'll be able to get to that point, and that we'll be able to have a positive impact in terms of moving the needle, trying to have to create some positive movement on the issue.
Yeah, so obviously I'm in the media as well, right? But the thing is, I'm in the more traditional side of the media. I cover the financial markets and what have you. And I know already that as an industry, media is kind of like, it's thankless, like, you know. You don't get paid a lot. Hours are long, stress is there. There's occupational hazards like cynicism and negativity, right? And it's not a industry or profession that people necessarily gravitate towards, as opposed to say medicine or law or whatever, right? And then there's your side, which is even more on the fringe, which is even more thankless, which is even less paid, which is even more, I would go so far as to say, unrecognized by society, even though what you're doing is so necessary to society. And we'll talk about your causes in a little while, right? So I think the main question is why do you do it? How did you fall into this, and why do you do this?
Yeah, for me it was by accident, right? Like I was doing a lot of lifestyle and entertainment journalism
That's
with
world
this.
apart.
Yeah, at the start of my career is a bit more towards that, but I had editors who always pushed me to try to think about how we can use the platform that we're very privileged to have, right? Like if you're in the media, you've been engaged by a large media company, every story you write, I was always told by my editor back then, especially back in the days of print media, that every story we publish, essentially potentially 1 million people are going to read this story, because those, in terms of circulation numbers and all that. So that kind of impressed on me the kind of responsibility that we have as media professionals. And then along the way, we wanted to do a bit more, and that's where we engaged a producer. His name is Elroy, very, very talented investigative journalist.
Your brother.
Yeah, this happens to be my brother. Yeah, and he was doing some documentary work at the time, and he said, why don't we try to push for more investigative journalism in Star Media Group at the time. So we were part of the Star, part of the Rage team. Yeah, we gave it a try, and then it worked out really, really well. Had a positive impact, and from there, I was kind of hooked, because I think once you see the results of that work, once you see how it actually has an impact on people's lives, in some ways, it has actually, it saves lives in a way, right? Investigative journalism. We don't want to be too self-aggrandizing, but sometimes it really can make that much of a difference in people's lives. So when you do that, it's hard to walk away from it. So even until now, sometimes people could say maybe that we're being overly idealistic. The way we want to do investigative journalism, we want to be not for profit. We don't want to be backed by any of the major media companies. We don't want to have all these types of commercial pressures. People say it's unrealistic. But having seen the kind of impact that the work can have, it's hard to walk away from it. So I guess that's why we're still here.
So some of the causes that you pursued, obviously child predators, corrupt politicians, corrupt civil servants with fraudulent land deals, fake college admissions where foreign students are brought into Malaysia and then they actually lured into child trafficking or human trafficking.
Human trafficking. Forced labor, yeah.
Forced labor. There's a whole plethora of stuff, right? Talk about what kind of rewards you have, because people think of value, people think of success as usually financial, monetary in nature. But the kind of success that you are enjoying is much, much more meaningful than that, I think. Right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. For example, we did a project called Refugees No More. It was led by Elroy. It was one of our co-founders at the Fourth, and Samantha Chow as well, a great journalist who became one of our primary impact producers. So that's a role we kind of created where she focuses on creating these campaigns to try to drive impact. So we run the investigations, we expose a problem, we want to make sure that we also driving solutions, we investigate solutions as well. So the two of them were kind of spearheading this project called Refugees No More. And I remember, long story short, this large group of refugees, the Chin community, who had come to Malaysia from Myanmar, probably around a decade ago. It's quite a large community, probably 50,000 of them in Malaysia. And UNHCR had said that came up with a policy where they were telling these refugees that the country is safe, that they can go home. So they were giving a deadline. They were given a deadline of about 18 months to find a way back to Myanmar, or get resettled in a third country, in another country. But essentially, Malaysia, it would be impossible for them to get, some form of residence here or legal status here. So essentially, they had to go back. There was really no other options. And it was obviously devastating for the community. We were starting to see really adverse mental health impacts. Like some of the NGOs were reporting high rates of suicide ideation and things like that. So it was really, really damaging. And in some of the cases, some of the children, for example, they have medical health needs. There was one story in particular, a child, a baby girl who had a birth defect, needed life-saving surgery. And without, this official status from UNHCR, that child would essentially die, right? There's no other way. So for us, it was obviously a huge issue. We investigated and we showed how these decisions were made without proper consultation and stuff like that. And at the end, because of our reporting, I believe because of the work of Samantha and Elroy, we were able to push for the decision makers to reverse that policy, and ultimately the Chin refugees were allowed to stay in Malaysia. So that was that one moment I remember that we found out about this decision first. Right, we were lucky enough we're connected to some people on the inside who said, by the way, that policy is being reversed. You guys did it. Your campaign worked. And Samantha was able to make that call to the Chin community leaders and break the news to them. And I one regret I have was that she didn't wait for me to make that call, because from what I heard, she said there was laughter, there were tears, there was rejoicing, and it was just a moment I will never forget. Like to have played a small part in that, in supporting Always and Samantha's work, getting that project off the ground, and then finally seeing how much it meant to the community. I think that's worth more than $1 million. Like, or it's worth more than anything really.
Yeah, they say that the pen is mightier than the sword, right? And obviously the media, you call yourself the fourth. Well, actually that's short for the fourth estate, which in the UK means the fourth pillar of a functioning democracy. The other pillars are, I think, the legislature, the judiciary, and of course the executive, the police, and all that, right? The army. And then the media are there. It's kind of like the fourth part of this chair, you know. Without the fourth part, it's going to fall over and fall into anarchy or whatever, right? The thing is, I think you're being very humble because essentially you've saved lives, right? With this initiative.
I think our team has, yeah. I think, and I think the journalists that I've worked with over the years, they don't get it anywhere near enough recognition. They've won nearly every international award that's available to them. You know, some people ask, "Oh, why haven't you won the Pulitzer?" Because we don't publish in the U.S. It's as simple as that. I think if we had, I'm quite sure they would have got it too. So people don't. So I always say this: like in most other fields, they would be celebrated much more.
Yeah.
Right. If they were athletes, whatever, you know. But because they're journalists, people tend to, especially as investigative journalists, a lot of times you can't really show their faces.
Well, it's a fringe of a fringe, isn't it?
Yeah,
Essentially, right?
exactly. We have to protect their identities in certain cases. We can't be like social media influencers, even though we know those strategies work, even though we know it's important that people relate with the human face in our content, but sometimes we can't do that. Sometimes some of our best investigative journalists are the ones whose identities needs to be protected the most. So for all those reasons, society doesn't really, unfortunately, get to recognize them for their great work. So whenever I have a chance, I always make it very, very clear. My role is very, very easy compared to the investigative journalists who are out in the field, right? I don't have to do so much field work. I get to speak about the great work that they do. So I take every opportunity that I can to shine the spotlight on their work without putting them in any, unnecessary security risk. But ultimately, they are the ones out there essentially doing the work of defending democracy, defending the rights of the people, and doing it without ever, knowing that they most likely will not get the recognition they deserve.
And yet you're here, the face of the fourth, and you are quite unabashedly putting your image out there. When actually the work that you do puts a lot of bad people behind bars and takes away their rice bowler, doesn't it? Right? I remember you did one story about corrupt land deals where actually it was a stinger essentially, right? You masqueraded, or your team, or part of your team masqueraded as I think buyers, and then agents. I think the middlemen of the politicians, civil servants came forward, and you got it on video, right? And these guys, I mean, they're profiting millions, and this is why we see a lot of shonky apartments, shonky buildings, things falling apart, and lives are lost, but they don't care, right? They made their money, they've gone away, right? Why'd you do it? I mean, is this your atypical brave journalist where, talk about the risks, Ian.
Right.
What kind of risks are we talking about?
Yeah. So for me, I feel like I'm, again, in a more privileged position, right? Like having started off, so to speak, as the face of, back then at the Star and Rage and now at the Fourth, I'm lucky enough to have some level of, I feel, a bit more safety just by association. I'm part of different fellowships and different organizations and networks internationally as well. So I have quite a bit of support. So I don't take that lightly. I want to use that to make sure that the real journalists on the ground, get the support that they need. And for that, I need to be the one that's out there speaking on their behalf, trying to get support, trying to, get the public to be subscribers, to pay, to, So yeah, it's always a tricky thing mentally for me. It's tricky even to talk about it. We have policy. We personally, I don't want to talk about it too much.
Yeah.
I feel like we have certain risk mitigations in place, and I have enough support from these international organizations. Um, so yeah, it's what it is. Yeah.
What are some of the risks?
If for us here in Malaysia, we're fairly fortunate. Most of it, I think the primary risk here is legal. So nowadays, it's becoming more common, especially for human rights defenders, for environmental crime. Sorry, let me try that again. So I think the main risk in Malaysia is legal risk for journalists. And if you look at for human rights defenders, environmental defenders, it's usually the same as well. You have big organizations that have a lot of money, so they'll do what we call SLAP suits. So these are strategic lawsuits against public participation. That's what it stands for. You guys can go Google it. It's SLAP. And uh, it's a new tactic that's becoming increasingly common across the world and now in Malaysia as well, where people with deep pockets can just take on frivolous lawsuits against against people, just to bleed them dry, just to take their focus and time away from the actual work that they're doing in defending human rights or defending the environment. So we've seen that here in Malaysia, and that's kind of the main thing that we are concerned about. Also, because in Malaysia, our laws aren't exactly favorable for journalists or people who want to speak up against these people. We have criminal defamation laws here. So, for example, if we say something that somebody else can find somehow, somewhere, like in some type of technicality, say that, oh, you have defamed me, we can go to jail. There is obviously the Communications Multimedia Act, where a lot of things, anything you say that may be deemed as insulting or offensive, we can be charged with that as well. So it's not just draining us of money, it's not just draining us of time that can be spent doing our work, it's also potentially something that can take away our freedom. And so that's the main risk. Having said that, in other countries in Southeast Asia, if we look at our colleagues in the Philippines and in Indonesia, where they face the same legal risk, but they also have that dimension of physical risk.
There's danger.
Yeah, there's
in
physical
Mexico
danger.
as well. Just crazy.
Exactly. So
Bodies found in ditches, and it's a different world,
yeah, in Latin America. So I think a lot of people look to like other countries or other continents where they feel like, oh, it's so dangerous for journalists. But we don't have to look too far. In Indonesia, there are very, very brave journalists who do the same work that the Fourth does, and they do it in the face of much more physical risk. So I think in Malaysia we have to recognize that right now is actually a pretty good time for press freedom in Malaysia. So we must take advantage of that and try to put in place structural changes, systemic changes that will ensure investigative journalism can thrive, for generations to come.
It's interesting that they say we are now at a good time for journalism in terms of media freedoms.
Yeah.
To the normal Joe, that seems incongruous with what we feel on the ground. Can you explain?
Yeah, and I totally get that because like I said, all these laws are still in place, right?
Yeah.
The CMA is still there, criminal defamation laws are still there.
Yeah.
But what I would say is, if we look at the course of history of the country, I think we're in a relatively good place.
We're just less shitty than before now.
yeah. Of course, it's all relative. Like I said, if we look at 10, 15 years ago,
It was mad.
it would be very different. The journalists were constantly afraid. Not just investigative journalists. All journalists were always tiptoeing around issues, not sure what to include, what to write, what not to write. So, with that in mind, that's a very low bar, but we are in a fairly good place. There's a government that was built on the platform of reforms, so we need to make sure those reforms actually happen. And there's so many reforms that I know everybody's trying to push for fairly, but I hope that reforms in terms of press freedom are not lost in that, because that's such a fundamental thing. Like you were saying, it's a fundamental pillar of society. Press freedom defends all other human rights. Press freedom holds all other sectors of government, all other sectors of society accountable. So let's sort that out. That should be a priority.
It just speaks to the kind of society that we have, that some of the participants in our society who do such important work. I just want to say, so for example, journalists or let's just say teachers, lah, right? They're so poorly paid. And then it also speaks to the society in the sense that some of these people who are, for example, they cut down trees, or they'll traffic in human beings, or they'll deal drugs, or they'll do all kinds of black market, and they're given titles like Tan Sri and Dato Sri and Dato, right? And then it just seems to me that society is all upside down because we are rewarding the criminals and penalizing the good people. I remember there was one time a friend of mine was working in CITYPlus, and her salary was like 1,300 or something, 1,400, and she had to work like extra overtime and all that just to get over 2,500 ringgit a month. And then her annual increment was like 30 ringgit. Can you imagine?
Wow.
Sinchujitpo, you know.
Yikes.
I don't know what it's like now, but this is like maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. The world is upside down. I guess it comes down to like some fundamental issues that we have in society in terms of being a very capitalistic.
But it's not much
world we
better in
live
the
in as
US,
well.
is it? Because the media there have come
Yeah.
under some kind of capture, though. It seems to me.
Yeah, and there are so many retrenchments happening in U.S. media as well. So yeah, it's not just Malaysia, I guess. Yeah.
Can you describe the mind and mentality of the investigative journalist, Ian? What drives this person?
Ultimately, I think it's the pursuit of truth. And this is gonna sound so cliched, but it's the pursuit of truth and justice. I always think it comes down to those two things. We have an obsession to make sure that the truth is known and that justice is served, especially for people in positions of power. We want to make sure that when if you have power, you should have responsibility, you should have accountability. So there are people who are in positions of power, who are wealthy, who don't who don't amass that wealth at the expense of other people. That's great, but there are also a lot of people, like you say, like you rightly pointed out, that use that power to further entrench themselves in power through means that are unjust. So I think most investigative journalists, that's their main goal, to make sure that these injustices come to light and something changes, that the world is a slightly better place because of our reporting.
Well, they say that the first casualty of war is the truth, and based on what you just told me, you've got at least at any point in time 10 to 20 causes to pursue. Not all of them with obviously legislative changes at the end of the rainbow, which is I guess goes to show that Malaysia is in some sense in some kind of war, some kind of civil society war, where the forces of good and evil are in constant motion, right?
To be fair, I think that's every country, that's every
Yeah,
society.
it's just the extent, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but like I was saying, if we look at the course of human history, and this is something I always hold to heart, and because I know whenever we talk in these interviews, things get quite bleak and quite bad. But I was very fortunate once to meet Barack Obama, the former U.S. president, as part of this leadership program, and one of the main takeaways for me was. That's one of the things that he repeats quite a lot is, if you look at the course of human history, things have been getting better. If you're when you're in the thick of it, it doesn't always look that way. It looks like things are terrible, especially right now in this particular point in time where what's happening in Gaza, in Ukraine, it doesn't look like it's getting better. But in general, the work that we're doing, the work that human rights defenders are doing, the work that people in power who are doing their best to make sure that they are wielding that power responsibly, that work matters. That work is making a difference. So Obama's thing was, like he was talking about, if you look at in terms of the number of people who are dying from conflict, thankfully it's getting lesser, where warfare is changing. So we need to have that perspective, not just in terms of looking at, global history, but in looking at the history of Malaysia as well and the progress that we have as a nation, and not give up hope. So a lot of people look at the work we do and they say, oh, why? Like you asked as well, and I don't blame you. Like, what convinces you? What has possessed you to do this when everything looks, like so awful? And that's one thing that I remind myself from time to time. It is getting better, slowly but surely. We will probably never see the big picture change that we want to see in society in my lifetime. But I've moved the needle forward a bit. I help people take a couple of steps forward, and hopefully the young people of the next generation take over. And I believe they will.
Before we started recording, I think I asked you about your space, your office space, and basically you described your office as slightly being bigger than this room, which is to say it's not very big. And you have, what, 12 people?
Oh no, we're down to like 8 people now. So,
Okay.
yeah, it's a challenging industry,
So,
right?
and it's a constant search for funds, right? And
Yeah.
and then at the same time, you've got to make sure as much as possible that the funds are not to be tainted. It doesn't compromise your ideals in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And that must limit the funnel considerably.
Yeah. We've had to turn down quite a few opportunities,
Did
especially.
they come with strings attached?
We believe that they would.
Down the line,
Yeah,
they might
down
have
the
just said
line.
initially no, but then is it?
Everybody promises that, right? Everybody who comes in as who is interested in working with us will say, especially if they know who we are and what we do, and we try to be as transparent about that as possible. So, but as a matter of sometimes it's just a matter of principle, right? And it's also about sending the right message. So even if somebody gives you all these guarantees and says all the right things, we don't want the people to get the idea that this is you can always compromise on a lot of these things. So we are very pragmatic. We know that there are some gray areas where there is room to navigate and to maneuver and to keep doing what we do without compromising who we are. So for us, it's never black and white. We operate in a lot of these grays, and at the end of the day, the line for us is our journalistic principles, right? So that's something that we always try to promote as well. Journalistic principles that most people won't know about, but they really, again, are part of the bedrock of democracy, I feel, right? Of a functioning society. Principles like, truth and accuracy, fair and balanced reporting of information and things like that. So those are the principles we hold firm to, and we say it on public platforms like this as far as we can, so that our supporters, so that people who follow our work can hold us accountable as well. Yeah.
So is there a high element of donations from the public? Do they have a platform to go to? Where do they send the money to? Do you use Patreon, for example? What would you use?
So we have started something called the Fourth Supporters Program. So if you want to support our work, you can sign up. It's basically a paid subscription program.
Yeah.
All our work is never behind a paywall. So that's something that we committed to very early, because the issues are so important. We don't want to hide them behind a paywall. So, but if you sign up as a subscriber, you get additional content. You get project specific updates, stuff like that. So you can go to our website www.thefourth.media, and there should be a big support button or subscribe button there. Having said that, when we built this platform, this subscription platform, we went in full well knowing that Malaysia has not had a success case with this model before for media, right? Malaysia Kini is the only one, and even then, for all the great work that they do, it's always a struggle. They still have to do so much commercial work to make ends meet, right?
I just heard they're laying off people now.
And I've heard as well that they're laying people off, which is really unfortunate, because Malaysia Kini has done such amazing work for the country. As an independent media. So personally, that's how I feel. So for us, we know that for the Fourth, we still do a lot of commercial work. We can choose our
So you
clients.
do like video ads or TVCs or whatever, is it?
Exactly. Lots of video production. So on any given day, we could be handling like a TV commercial or like a social media ad, and then an investigation at the same time, which is not ideal. So that's why we always encourage people, wherever we go, support your local independent media organizations, so that they get to focus more on the important journalism work, versus having to always split your time doing all this other stuff.
Did you consider crowdfunding or peer-to-peer lending or one of these things where, you obviously can work on public funds, or even like a Patreon, for example?
Yeah, so essentially the platform we set up is like our own version of Patreon. So we
Yeah.
do have a Patreon account, but the fees, I think it's like 9% goes to Patreon, so it's quite high.
It's quite a lot.
So we invested a bit to set up our own. Yeah, but again, we have to recognize that there has not been a single success case in Malaysia with that model.
That seems weird because through the years, especially in the last 10, 15 years, with this political awakening, right, that whenever someone from the perceived good side of the political divide got into trouble, whether it's, at one point, I think it's Guan Ning or something, and then there was a WhatsApp that went around, he's going to go to jail, he needs his money, and then boom, within like 2 hours, he had like raised $500,000. You know that one? Right?
Yeah.
But that's a bit weirder, right? That's a bit stranger.
Those incidents are few and far between.
Yeah.
So that's why even though we knew the chances of us succeeding with, audience revenue, which is what the industry calls it, like audience-based revenue, we set up the platform anyway. We always say it's just for when lightning strikes, you never know when one of our pieces really gets a lot of traction. And then everybody says, these guys at the Fourth seem like they're doing good work, and then decide to give us some money to continue that work. So it's really for that. It costs us a couple of thousand to maintain every year. So it's just really there to hope, in hopes that someday something good happens and the audience suddenly recognizes that our work is important.
It seems to me that there's a similarity between what you do and how the social media algorithms work, right? When you see a video going viral on YouTube, for example, it's probably because it resonates with more than one person, right? It's something very personal to them. So whether it's marriage or retirement or, I don't know, the loss of a loved one or, philosophy or whatever, right? With what you do, because it's basically human driven, right? It's basically affects human beings. Shouldn't that then have a high resonance with people, which then compel them to help fund you, essentially?
Not always. That's the unfortunate thing.
Do you think it's because there's too many interconnections between the wrongs of society and how people are profiting from it? Whether it's the banks or whether it's the private sector.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think so. One thing that we've done really well that a lot of international like conferences and all that have asked us to speak about is how we do storytelling, right?
Yeah.
So we managed to take these big investigative stories, these things about like really dark issues like human trafficking and all that, and we are able to do a lot of human-based storytelling out of it.
Well, the thing is, human trafficking, right, to the normal middle class Malaysian, they don't really care, right? It's like I did a video once on climate change with Dr. Darryl Weber, right? I mean, the views are like a 10th or 20th of what, you don't discuss if we had politics in the frame, right? People don't, because it doesn't resonate with them, right? They're too distant.
Yeah.
Climate change, who cares? They can just turn on the aircon, right? Even though that you can see palpably that things are changing. Human trafficking, they don't care because so what, right?
Yeah. So exactly. So I think I've been very lucky. The teams that I've worked with, at Rage and at the Fourth, we've been able to take these issues and turn them into something that's really compelling in terms of content. But that's not always the case. So, for example, the human trafficking, where we're able to show this very specific type of storytelling, this very specific story angle on how these colleges were being used. So that decision on focusing on that form of human trafficking, for example, made the story much more relatable to a larger audience. So, everybody's seen these kind of shop block colleges before. There are many students who are people who are perhaps thinking about, fresh graduates thinking about going to college. So that kind of clicks something in their minds. And secondly, we focus a lot on really profile-driven, character-driven storytelling. And that helps, and a lot of people have tried to follow our formula around with the people who are working in media, so that has been something that has been to our benefit, and still we struggle to break through in terms of the algorithm, because the algorithm is constantly changing, evolving, and now it's gotten to a point where even that form of human-driven content is not enough. Right now, people just go for sorry, excuse me. So even that form of like human-based storytelling is not enough. Now people just want to feel good vibes, right? You want a 30-second reel that makes you feel a bit better, or that gives you that dopamine boost, and there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody needs to cope with how whatever they have in their lives, but that just makes it harder for us to do our work. That makes it harder for very nuanced storytelling about difficult issues. It's hard to break through that noise.
I saw one of your best videos. This was called "The Apartment with No Entrance," It was so well shot, and it was so heart-rending, and you really felt for the people, the residents there,
Exactly.
right? And
Yeah.
I mean that shows a real art form in terms of your storytelling. But I just wonder how many people responded, financially or in terms of just vocal support or even political support.
Yeah. Sadly, we didn't get any extra like paid subscriptions from that.
Wow.
Yeah, that's just the way it is. Like I said, we knew that the subscription platform Malaysians just don't pay for news, let alone investigative journalism that comes out with 3 investigations a year, 4 investigations a year. So we did get a whole lot of subscribers on YouTube for that, thankfully. So that again is a great example of that type of character driven storytelling that we're so good at. That was a project by Elroy that I mentioned earlier,
Beautifully
and
done.
yeah,
Really beautifully
fantastic,
done.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing people that I get to work with. So that every we're lucky that a lot of our projects have that. Even our previous story on land rights had about 600,000 views across social media, which is really, really not bad for a story about land rights. But we were able to tie it to the farmers who are being evicted, who are losing their lands, who are losing their farms, in a way that is perhaps not completely fair. So we do have ways that we are pragmatic enough and we are savvy enough in terms of social media to be able to find an audience to be able to communicate these issues, but converting our viewers into paid subscribers is still something that we haven't cracked, and I don't believe many people around the world have been able to crack.
So you got, I think for me, I'm just going to guess that the holy grail would be some kind of legislative change or some kind of policy amendment, which then helps those in trouble, right? So that would be kind of like the holy grail because that's
Yeah.
the end result, right? That's the sum total. And then I think financial support would be secondary or even down the line a little bit because they don't always correspond, right? So how do you triangulate, policy amendments, financial support, and mass adoption or mass relevance when it comes to saying, okay, of the 15 issues in front of me now, which one will tick all those boxes? What is the thought process there?
In terms of like choosing projects, in terms
Yeah,
of how we
yeah.
devise our strategy.
Because Malaysia, I'm sure, has a lot of issues.
Yeah, it's
I don't
I
even know whether I can ask you to share about some of those issues because it will probably be in some sense confidential, or can you talk about some of them?
yeah. Unfortunately, right now there's nothing much that we can really talk about. But we don't really have that formula down pat right now. So I think that's a great idea. We should probably work on it. So right now it's very intuitive. We're a small team.
Yeah.
So we discuss among ourselves and we figure out based on experience what's going to be and of course based on the information we have available. So a lot of times we do desk research first. We start with desk research on these projects. So that means a lot of Googling, reading a lot of documents, speaking to people that we know, activists and experts. And from there, we make a decision based on the available information. But yeah, perhaps some, like you say, some type of matrix, some type of scoring to decide would be a good idea. Yeah.
So at one point in time, does life intervene? Where you're doing this great work, but then it doesn't, put food on the table or enough food on the table, and then I see this all the time. Well-meaning people who enter politics with a well-meaning point of view, and then they go into the system, and the system completely corrupts them. Right? At some point in time as well, you can see with the media as well. At one point in time, I hate to say this lah, the Star was a bastion of journalism, and then things changed. Right? Let's not go down there. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think yeah, we've lost a lot of people, great people,
Yeah.
to jobs that simply paid better.
Yeah.
I feel.
Yeah.
Um, and and I feel confident in saying that because most of the time they'll come and say, and in many cases they will apologize. And like, I'm really sorry,
Yeah.
Ian, but this has been great, but this for where I am in life right now, I need to take this opportunity, and it's happened time and time again. So it's just part of it's just part of our job right now. It's just part of the industry we're in, we know we're going to lose the best people. We know we won't be able to retain them. But for as long as we have them, we give them as much space to do great work. And then hopefully wherever they go next, they bring some of those values with them to those different industries.
And then it ripples out in positive waves across society.
Yeah,
right?
exactly, and I believe it always comes back.
Yeah.
I don't believe in karma or any cosmic forces at play when it comes to stuff like this, but I do believe that common sense and logic, like if you put up enough, if you do enough good, it comes back to you, right? If you pay it forward enough, somebody else is going to be convinced that it's a good idea to pay it forward, and it comes back around to you. So we try to do that. When they have to leave, we try to counter offer as much as we can, but you can never compete with what's out there. And most of the time they go, and we give them our best wishes. We write great reference letters for them, and we know that in one way or another they're going to continue doing great work, because the fact that they had stayed with us for however long they have to do this thankless work, like you said, to spend all those sleepless nights and all, especially the night before you publish something. Usually we
Gosh,
know.
yeah.
Usually we know we'll spend the night in the office. It's always you're gonna leave at like 3 or 4 a.m.
Yeah.
just tidying things up before it goes public,
Yeah,
before it
just-
goes live. All those nights, if they were willing to do all that, that they're gonna do better work, greater work wherever they go. So we always just wish them well, and they always end up exceeding our expectations wherever they are.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing I know about life at this stage, is that life always throws curveballs at you and makes you lose a lot of your innocence by the time you get to a certain vintage, right?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
So, this Merdeka Award that you just won, right?
Yeah.
It's in some sense the establishment recognizing you for what you've done. And do you think that, what does that mean for you in terms of
Honestly,
the relevance of how you sustain as a business?
yeah, honestly, I just took it as a chance to again highlight the great work of the team, highlight the great work of journalists, not just in my team but everywhere. It's not an award for me. I just happen to be again the face of the organization, and been lucky enough to do that. So I made sure in that acceptance speech that I just told everyone, support independent investigative journalism, support the people at the foref who are in many ways, sacrificing and risking a lot to defend truth and justice on your behalf in your country. And that's what it is. It's awkward, it's weird. But it's something that I appreciate, and I just want to make the most out of it to highlight the good work that's being done.
And then following that, winning that award, did you get a bump in subscriptions? Did you get a bump in donations?
No.
Interest?
I think it's early days, so
Yeah.
I really appreciate, especially the team behind the Merdeka Award Trust. They've been very supportive. They've
Yeah.
been very helpful in trying to help us help us spread the word about what we do. But I think it's early days. The kind of work we do is we're used to not getting immediate returns on a lot of the stuff that we do. We're just not built that way either, right? We're not.
So your main channels are what? Instagram and YouTube, is that right?
That's right. All the free platforms: Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook to a certain extent. But I think there are not that many Facebook users in Malaysia these days.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's on decline.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. I thought it was
Yeah.
like 13 million users or something, though.
I think a lot of them are legacy users and they're not active. So the active platforms that you want to be on these days are Instagram and TikTok. TikTok
Those are short
growing.
videos.
Exactly.
So how do you tell a
it's
story in
challenge.
30 seconds?
We're trying. So like the video you saw where where we did a bit of a sting with the real estate agents. So that was built for TikTok. We edited it in a way that made sense for TikTok. But obviously there's still the longer documentary. So if you want to understand the full situation about land rights and food security in Malaysia, you watch the full thing on YouTube. So we always try to think of it as a funnel. So anybody out there who's trying to think about like social media marketing, funnel, you have that broad base at the top where you are bringing in one touch users. Like it's very light touch, right? They see like 30 seconds and then maybe they get hooked, and then you funnel them further down to longer form content, more deeper engagement, and finally to the long sorry. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to cuss on this show, but then finally funnel them to that long, full-length documentary on YouTube, and then from there maybe they'll convert into a subscriber. So
Yeah.
that's the process that we're still working with. So we make sure that we have content for all stages of that funnel.
Because I mean, the YouTube algorithm it does pay a ton of money, right? But you haven't necessarily played that formula, which is about consistency, which is about speed,
Exactly.
which is about virality, which is about subscribers and views and all that.
Yeah.
I think you're about 12,500 subscribers.
Yeah.
And your last videos was some time ago, 2 months or something ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not easy.
Just resources, lah, right?
Exactly. So I think people who look at the work we do and think, "Oh, you guys are not doing it right," we know.
Yeah.
Like,
It's just resources, lah.
in terms of best practices, we know we're not doing all the best practices that we have to in order to get to build an audience. But when we compare it to the stuff that influencers do, for example, content creators do, or vloggers, it's so different, right? A vlogger can wake up, shoot something, uh, and and it has an audience.
Yeah.
So for us, it's a bit different. Like we said, the journalistic principles that are kind of like the bedrock of our work, that's something that we can't compromise on. And it's also a practical decision because we feel the minute we compromise on it in the long run, that's going to harm us, right? So we have to be as consistent as possible, saying that the work we did was well researched, it's accurate, it's fair and balanced, and that's what's going to build us an audience in the long run.
So you've got a role in the region as well with the Asian Investigative Network, and I think with the Barack, yeah, I think you're a fellow there, and a few other organizations, fellowships, and all that, right? What's the region? Where is the region in terms of these these transgressions against society?
Sorry, coming up.
Where is the region in terms of transgressions against society? Because I mean, this is essentially just crimes against humankind, right? How do you gauge what's out there? How mature, how not mature is Asia, Southeast Asia?
I think every region grapples with their own issues.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I haven't done enough work in different regions to be able to say. But I can talk about Southeast Asia, for example.
Yeah.
In the current role I have with the Asia Investigative Reporting Network, or AIR Network. So that's actually my primary role now, right? That's my main job, to build a network for investigative journalists in the whole region, and from there you can start seeing some of the issues. So Southeast Asia is a place where there is autocratic governments are on the rise, right? And that's something that's definitely a concern. So
Have they
again,
not always been dominant? I mean, Singapore is one, Malaysia's another, the Philippines clearly.
yeah, I think it always comes a bit in.
Myanmar.
Yeah, that's right. So it always comes a bit in cycles, right? Like we start to see that there are certain playbooks that they all seem to be learning from. The more you look at the different issues in those regions, you start to realize, oh, the powers that be seem to be responding to these issues in very similar ways. They seem to be enacting laws that work
They
in
see
a
the
similar
same
way.
consultants.
Yeah, yeah, I would guess so.
You know what I mean by that, right?
Yeah, I would guess so.
The
Yeah.
same shadow
Certainly
players.
feels that way. Yeah.
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 So what can you say about what's happening around the region? The level of maturation or not, things like that. I mean, yeah.
I think what we see, one thing that I've noticed, and I'm not sure if we're reading too much into it, but countries where the oppression is the highest is where the people tend to, be the most bold in terms of speaking out. And specifically from a journalism point of view. So it's been said many times that countries, for example, like Malaysia or Thailand or Singapore, journalists and investigative journalism is not quite as strong as, for example, places like the Philippines and Indonesia, or even in Myanmar, where there is much more oppression, where it's literally deadly to be a journalist. So sometimes for me, it feels like maybe we are lulled into a complacency sometimes as a middle income nation, as where our economy is fairly good compared to the rest of the region. And that's something that we should be careful about. In fact, like I said, it's precisely because things are slightly better right now, are getting better, that we have an opportunity to put lasting change in place, to push for reforms, true reforms that are going to stand us in good stead for decades to come. So we need to take that seriously now.
Yeah, I can see. I mean, the more wealthy society, the more wealthy an economy, usually the more well managed it is, and that also means the truth is, there's a healthier media, lah, a more independent media. When you talk about your AIR network, right? Your Asian Investigative Reporting Network, you're trying to recruit journalists, investigative journalists, to the fold. Is that what you're trying to do?
Yeah.
So what does that entail?
So we're trying to create a support system for investigative journalists
Yeah.
across the region.
Yeah.
We are trying to make sure that they have the right training, the right support for, in case there are legal issues or other emergencies. And also a big part of it is getting them to collaborate across borders as well, because a lot of the issues that are plaguing the region are actually cross-border crimes and corruption. So those type of issues need a cross-border solution as well. It needs journalists from all different countries to be working together. So that's what we're trying to facilitate.
Yeah, whether it's animal trafficking or human trafficking or even drug trafficking. And
Exactly. Those are all
that kind of-
transporter issues.
all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, man. So, well, I guess what's the next 10 years hold for you, in terms of trying to keep the good fight alive, keep fighting the good fight?
Yeah. We don't have the luxury sometimes of looking that far ahead, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We just do the best that we can, with the money that we have at this point, the runway that we have right now, to do whatever we can, and then see where it goes. So that's the unfortunate part. We used to have these big aspirations and all that, but age and experience kind of tempers that, and you always just like let's focus on now. Having said that,
What was the big goal?
we want to be fully audience funded.
Yeah.
We believe that's probably the best model there is right now. That means subscribers are the ones that are paying for us to do the work that we do as
Or
independently
rather,
as
the
possible.
content on videos that you do on YouTube might give you a big enough revenue. I mean, I've heard stories about some of these, I'm not going to say influencers, but some of these channels, right? Documentary filmmaking channels or travel ones where they're very informative, right? Millions and millions of subscribers.
Yeah.
And I mean, the revenues are huge, hundreds of thousands a year or millions a
Yeah.
year. I think that's possible, though.
That is.
It means a dilution of what you do in some sense and more towards the mass-friendly stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
But also those examples are actually quite few and far between.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
tend to be from developed nations, right?
Yeah.
You're based in a
For
country
sure,
where
for sure.
you have a bit
Well,
more.
Vice is a bit like that, right? At one point.
Yeah, look how look where they are now.
Well, they went somewhere, and then they kind of like reversed, right? Course.
Yeah, there's a long story behind that, and people should Google that. I
Yeah.
think it was really about how the funds were raised in the first place.
Mm.
So there was a lot of investment into it at one point, but I think the fundamentals of the organization weren't quite there.
Mm.
So it fell apart quite quickly. So again, very few examples around the world where content alone is able to sustain it using the typical social media revenue models. It's very difficult for the type of content that we want to do, that we have to do as well, right? In order to really play that role as the fourth estate in holding people in power accountable. That model doesn't seem to be working for us right now. But hopefully, again, if I think mindsets shift, right? If the people start to see the value of what we do a bit more, maybe that will change. Maybe we'll have enough views. We'll have enough like for example, the Facebook people will give us stars or whatever. Like each stars, I don't know how much it's worth, like 0.01 cent or whatever, right?
Is that really?
I don't know. Yeah, but it's clearly not a significant amount.
Yeah.
So if we get to that stage where people recognize the importance of media enough to put in some of their money towards it, then maybe that content creator model might work for us. But until then, we still have to we still have to apply for grants. We'll still have to do commercial work, and do so very, very carefully.
I'm not sure what you say about audience-funded initiatives are so futile in Malaysia, because I think it's UNICEF, one of these other organizations.
Uh-huh.
They've been around like for 30 years. And the vast majority of their operating funds, which is millions a year, is actually from the public. I think 60-70%, because I think a friend of mine used to work there.
Right.
And she told me that, yeah, every year without fail, people will just put the money there. And they feel compelled to do it.
Yeah. Well, I guess especially for UN agencies, right, you do get government funding already, right?
Yeah.
So you do
So you got that stable base lah.
yeah, you have a steady foundation, a stable foundation from which to work,
Yeah.
to move forward. And then from there, you can also solicit donations and things like that. And obviously, there's the brand as well, right? So that hopefully we can get to that point as well. So again, I think society sees that role of UNICEF as being important, especially when you're hyper focused on child rights. So I feel that's great, that people recognize that. Hopefully people recognize the importance of journalism and donate in a similar manner as well at some point in time. But we're not holding our breath quite right now. We're not putting all our hopes on that right now, which is why we founded ourselves as a social enterprise, and we still do commercial, work as well. So again, just trying to be realistic about it and not putting all our eggs in that basket, because it's gonna take a while before we reach UNICEF levels.
Yeah. I mean, how old are they, right?
Yeah.
Where do you think Malaysia most needs, or where do you think ASEAN needs the most attention in terms of all the assortment of things that they're doing, irresponsibly? Is it in land? Is it in property? Is it in children? Is it in single women? Is it in, refugees? Is it in, I don't know, there's so many, there's a whole litany, right?
It's so hard to say. It's really hard to say. For me, if I'm being self-serving, I would honestly be inclined to say it is press freedom.
Yeah.
I feel like across the region, there are not enough institutions in place to ensure that the people get access to the truth, and that the media is empowered to report without fear or favor. And that is to the detriment of society in general. So one thing I always believe is that journalism empowers a lot of other human rights, right? By having a solid base of journalism and journalistic integrity and press freedom in a society, that helps support others. So, for example, for the fourth, we do work in child rights, in human trafficking. We've done work in education as well, right? So once we are empowered to do that, we can help support a lot of these other causes. So, yeah, just by that logic, I feel
certainly as a parent with quite young children, the work that they did in terms of child predators is huge, and I didn't know that. And if you can keep up doing more of that kind of work, which relates to people and how it can help them, that can be one way forward for sure.
Yeah. And yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. And I just want to say that is the result of us having that at that point 4 to 5 years of really consistent funding, right? From Star Media Group, which is something that, we are very appreciative of. At the time, the editorial management was hugely supportive of our work, and they saw the long-term benefits of it as well. So for those 4 to 5 years, they invested in us, and then they saw the results. We were bringing in revenue as well when we were creating impact. It was great in terms of branding. So with consistent support, that is what great investigative journalism can do. So now we're trying to get to that point again. Yeah.
Okay, man. Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Certainly need it, and I think society needs to do a better job of recognizing the true heroes of society, rather than those Tan Sris and those Datuk Sris that are running around doing all kinds of nonsense.
Yeah. Well, one thing I have to say is, like for us, we're lucky to have, for example, things like the Merdeka Award. For me, that was, like I said, very unexpected. But if I hadn't gotten that award, that recognition,
that's Petronas, right?
Yeah. Like we wouldn't be here. Like I probably wouldn't be here talking to you. So we do appreciate that stuff.
Well, it gives you a platform of validation, right? Which then gives you another platform to go on and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So those things actually do make a difference for us as well.
Okay, man. Good luck.
Thank you.
A thousand wishes for the future.
Thank you.
All right.